I think we're ready now. Okay, so coming up first, Mr. Garrison Hayes. Let's do it again. Y'all gonna clap.
You love God. What's wrong with you?
I'm gonna try not to be worldly now. Okay.
I love God.
Clap it up, clap it up, clap it up.
What's wrong with you?
All right, up next we have Mr. Justin Gibney.
I don't think that I could live no other way.
Come on, y'all can do more, y'all can do more, y'all can do more. All right. We have Dr. Terrence Lester. Come on, Doc. Also, we have Miss Ikemini Uwan. Come on now, scream it out one more time. And last but not least, we have Brother Dr. Jamar Tisby. All right, all right, all right. Thank y'all so much. Okay, so I started this off, by telling y'all, what I do in the political atmosphere, and pretty much everybody on this panel in some shape, form, or fashion touches that space. And y'all know that we are in an election season, right? So we want to figure out, how do we navigate the world? How do we move about while remaining faithful to Christ, but engaging in society? So I'll start with you, Justin. As a Black Christian influencer, how do you prioritize authenticity and integrity in your online activism and advocacy?
Man, that's a good question. I think I would kind of go back even to John 7. So in John 7, y'all might recall, Jesus' brothers come to him and they're basically like, you're getting this whole public figure thing wrong. And I think what it exposed was that they did not understand exactly why he was there. He wasn't there primarily to be a public figure. He had a much more significant calling that they didn't really get. And I think for us, that should teach us something too, because we are not here, we don't have this influence for the sake of pursuing influence, right? We have a call, we have a commission, and I think Black Christian influence in the public square is gonna come with a cross, right? It's not about the applause of pop culture. We have to be willing to say what needs to be said. And so so the way that I think about the integrity conversation and all that, even as we try to expand our platforms, which isn't a bad thing, and there's been a lot of great talk about that here today, I think we need to keep in mind that we have to steward the platform, and that may be even more important. Because if we don't, I think we run into something that they talked about last panel, which was audience capture, where you're saying what your audience expects to hear and what they want to hear, but you're not really telling them what they need to hear. You're tickling their ears. And you're not giving them those hard truths that they really just need to digest, that may not make them feel good immediately and might not get you a like on the post that you put up because they needed to hear it. And again, we go back to John, you go to John 6, and this is exactly what Jesus did. As his ministry was scaling and coming to critical mass, what does he do? He gives them a hard teaching. And some of his people walked away because of that hard teaching, but he wasn't there to flatter them or to pacify them. He was there to teach them, instruct them, and challenge them at times. And I think that's where the integrity comes in. When you're willing to say something to hold yourself accountable or to make others be challenged that you know is not gonna go viral, but it needs to be said.
And I didn't say this in the intro, this panel is brought to us by your organization and campaign, and that's exactly what you all do. That's what you purport, correct?
Yeah, exactly. The AND Campaign is a Christian civic organization. I'm the president of that organization, and we really just tried to get Christians to engage, not based on your party, not based on your ideology, but based on biblical principles. So you can be in a party, that's fine with us, but the first question you should ask is, am I being faithful with my vote? Am I being faithful with my voice, which we would say will cause you to challenge both sides of the conversation.
And I'm gonna take it to Garrison because you do some of that work that Justin's talking about, right? Particularly in talking about the political sphere, but you're in what we would consider mainstream culture, right? With working with Mother Jones. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, the role, so Garrison. I am a journalist and content creator. My content focuses on history and politics and culture, specifically focused on anti-racism. And I think when the question of integrity comes to me, the first thing that comes to my mind is how am I dismantling the narratives about Black people that keep us in the place that we are collectively finding ourselves in? How am I challenging the ways in which white supremacy is present in us, in our churches, in our communities, and in our government, in society at large? And so if I'm holding myself accountable to that, how can I dismantle the very structures? How can I help to dismantle the structures that are harming Black people specifically? And I think in many ways we are led, and see, we talked about getting in trouble. I might get in trouble with this.
Come on, get in trouble today.
But we are often given a gospel that neuters our political power, while those who wish to take away our power are leveraging their understanding of Scripture for their own political ends. Am I making sense? And so my role when I talk about faith, my role when I talk about what's happening in the world is to undermine that. It is to help us to think more clearly about our role in the world and what we are up against. We aren't up against something that can be dealt with kind of kid gloves. We have to be very explicit. We have to be very targeted, because what's happening when it comes to our voting rights, what's happening when it comes to our water rights, like they're poisoning you. You, as Black people in this room, you're very likely being poisoned if you live in a Black community. And we can't deal with that in a neutral way and so I feel that my integrity really hinges on being able to address those things specifically and in a targeted way.
Yeah. You said something good about those that are trying to take away our rights are also leveraging Scripture against us. Let me come to the theologians of the room. Come on. I'm not one of them. They over here. Dr. Jamar, could you speak to that? Because a lot of your work is grounded in your experience of being in a particular space and coming out of that. Talk to the people.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Jamar Tisby. I'm a historian and an author, and unlike a lot of folks in this room, I didn't grow up Christian, and when I did come to faith, it was in the context of a white evangelical space. And so I have a lot of exposure to some of what Garrison was talking about in terms of how folks are using Scripture in ways that even politically oppress us as Black folks. And one of my emphasis in terms of study is white Christian nationalism. What I often say about white Christian nationalism is it's the greatest threat to democracy and the witness of the church in the United States today.
Talk about it.
When we talk about the witness of the church, we're talking about people leaving the faith, and it's not because we're too justice-oriented. It's not because we care about people too much. It's because they see people using the language of Christianity in politically abusive ways and say, if that's what Christianity's about, I want no part of it. And I don't blame them. But we also have to understand the phenomenon that is white Christian nationalism, which I define as an ethnocultural ideology that uses Christian symbolism as a permission structure for the acquisition of political power and social control.
Okay, say that one more time. Talk to us again one more time.
White Christian nationalism is an ethnocultural ideology that uses Christian symbolism as a permission structure for the acquisition of political power and social control. That meaning, very quickly, it is racially based in terms of who is the quote-unquote true American. It would be those considered white people. It's ethnocultural. You'll hear a lot of talk about Western civilization and classical education. It's an ideology because it relies a lot more on feelings, fears, perception, identity than facts and figures. And so you can't argue someone out of this. And then it uses Christian symbolism. We saw this on January 6th as one example. crosses, Bibles, and prayers, which I emphasize where it's said in Jesus' name. But it uses it for a particular purpose. It's a permission structure, literally a divine imprimatur that what you're doing is holy. And then the true goals are the acquisition of political power. So when these folks get in office, what they want to do is enshrine minority rule, which means they never have to win a popular vote or the majority, but they've used the levers of democracy and changed them so that they remain in power. And then lastly, social control. There's a hierarchy in society that they envision, and black people are never on top or have access there.
Mr. Kimini, I see you over there getting stirred up, head nods and whatnot. Piggyback that and tell us your thoughts.
Hello.
We hear you.
Good morning, y'all. My name's Akemini, public theologian, co-host of Truth Table podcast and Get in the Word with Truth Table, and I'm also a reparations activist. Thank you. I'm co-signing everything that Jamar's saying, and I think it's true. I think before the term white Christian nationalism came up, I used to call it, and I still do, call it white supremacist Christianity. And I think we have to be wary of the ways in which white supremacist Christianity shows up in the black church and in the ways in which it masquerades in our church. Do we have American flags and Christian flags hanging in our sanctuaries? Why? do we cart out a Christian faith that sanitizes Jesus and removes Jesus from his political context? Because the truth of the matter is that Jesus was absolutely executed by the state, but he was also executed by us because of our sins. And so both of those realities are true and real. And if we have a sanitized gospel that removes Jesus from that context and domesticates Jesus, then we will find ourselves siding with genocide in Israel. Anyone? That's going on right now in Gaza. We'll find ourselves siding with Trumpism, which is fascism. We'll find ourselves co-signing all types of legislation that continue to bind and marginalize our people. And so we have got to get very serious about putting on our thinking caps when we get into the church house. We have to have the mind of Christ. And that means we have to engage not only our hearts and our emotions, but we have to engage our minds. We have got to know that we have been given power and agency to make a change in this world. And we cannot abdicate that responsibility and say, oh, I'm just here to advance the kingdom. How exactly do you think you're going to advance the kingdom? By abdicating your right to vote? How exactly are you going to advance the kingdom? By sitting out the political primary elections and presidential elections? How exactly are you going to advance the kingdom like that? How are you going to advance the kingdom by writing in Jesus' name on the ballot? How dare you?
She talking today.
How dare you diminish our King Jesus by writing his name on a ballot? How dare you? How could you ever diminish the sovereign God in that way? No, you have a choice to make, and there's nothing virtuous about not choosing. That is a politic, and it's called cowardice.
I think the panel is over.
I'm sorry. It's time out for play. 2024, this year is chaotic on so many levels. Rights being stripped away, books being banned, DEI gone, affirmative action gone. How do you think they did that? They organized.
Yes.
They put judges in.
Yes.
They elected judges to move these policies. So at what time will we wake up and realize what time it is? Be like the sons of Issachar. Be like Ida B. Wells Barnett. Be like Fannie Lou Hamer. Be like Nannie Helen Burroughs. You don't know who I'm talking about? Google it. Read.
Yes.
I'm telling you, study to show yourself approved. Not only the scriptures, but also history.
Uh-huh.
Come on. Dr. Terrence, how does one do that? How does one get engaged, right? Because it is easy for a lot of folks to just sit on the sidelines. A lot of people have been disenfranchised and disengaged over years, right? So what is the call to action for the people in the room to take back to their local spheres of influence for people to get engaged in the political process?
It's a great question. Terrence Lester, founder of Love Beyond Walls. I'm a public scholar, and my research focuses on public policy and social change. Back to the integrity question.
Yeah.
The first thing I thought about was the word becoming flesh and dwelling among them. So many times we are online, but not on site. And Jesus represents proximity. And proximity to the target audiences or target groups that public policy actually targets. Case in fact, July 1st, 2022, a bill was passed in the state of Tennessee that made homelessness a Class E felony. To sleep outside, you can be fined a felony, taken to jail, loss of voter rights, but then we have to ask ourselves, why is it that 50% of those who are unhoused in the United States of America are black and brown? When we go back to 1932, the first homelessness protests that happens in this country were white World War I and World War II and One and Two World War I veterans, right? They marched to the White House, and guess what they get? They get the GI Bill. But guess who wasn't included in the 1940s? Black and brown people. Guess who was being redlined in the 1930s and 1940s? Black and brown people. Guess who don't have access to homes in the second mass era of homelessness in the United States of America? Black and brown people. So when I talk about proximity, I'm talking about getting close to the issues that are showing up in the suffering of those who are waking up every single day and have the courage to wrestle with poverty in this country. So I go to the state of Tennessee, and this is a practical solution. One of the things in politics, you always have to ask who has the power, right? Because in the political space, power controls everything. There's a formal agenda, there's an informal agenda, right? You have to have stakeholders, you have to have access to wealth and interest and all of those things. But what happens when your voice is silent and you can't get your interest on the public agenda? So they criminalize those who are unhoused. They criminalize those who are impoverished, and then they label them. Homelessness in this United States of America is one of the only justice issues where you can be labeled for something that you don't have and then punished for trying to survive it. Okay, so I go to the state of Tennessee. I do an ethnographic study, and I give the microphone to the people whose voices have been silenced. I allow people to speak for themselves. It makes news. In the state of Tennessee, they were about to pass another bill called Governed Sanctioned Homelessness Encampments. That's basically a concentration camp for those who are unhoused in the United States. I'm talking about my research interests, right? And so we use storytelling, we use media, we use proximity, we use passing the microphone, we use becoming aware of the issues that are actually facing these target groups are facing, and we organized and we took it to the steps right there in Nashville. And guess what? We got a bill stopped because we organized and we gave the people who were being criminalized the power to speak for themselves. So if you say you follow Jesus on Sunday, you also have to realize that birds of the air have nests and the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his heads. And he identifies with those who are poor and unhoused in this country. And we need to be standing up for those in proximity with those who are being criminalized and marginalized by public power. And that's what I'm saying. We have to take direct action. Because if you are only talking about it online, but you haven't been proximate, then you're a part of the problem.
Garrison, let me ask you this, because a lot of people in the audience and maybe those that are watching that enter into these social media streets may not want to talk online about politics, right? It's not my brand. That's not what I'm trying to do, you know. I do the makeup, I do the beauty, I'm a mom influencer, I'm a dad influencer, right? Or maybe I do DIY projects. What would you say to the person that says, well, I don't really identify that in my content, so how do I do what's being advocated for on this stage?
I'm not going to tell you what to make your content on, but I am going to tell you that everything you do is political.
That's right.
Everything about you is political. The brands that you represent are political.
That's right.
The things you put on your face as a makeup artist is a political decision. Where are those materials coming from? Who benefits from them? Who owns the means? Those are political decisions. How we're structured on this stage is a political decision. Everything about the way, everything we do is a political decision. Plato says this thing that if you refuse to engage with politics, you will always be ruled by those who are inferior to you. So if we aren't thinking politically and engaging politically, then if we aren't setting up the table, we are the meal, is what I'm trying to say. I also think it's important that we recognize our influence. I mean, this is a Black Christian influencers event, and so we all have influence. And your decision to talk about an issue, whether it be the genocide, I mean, the Biden administration went so far as to say that what's happening over in Gaza constitutes an international war crime, okay? So I'm not saying anything controversial anymore.
Anymore.
As
of yesterday.
But the genocidal war taking place in Gaza or something in your own community, your decision to talk about or not talk about those issues is an important decision, because there are people, I have these conversations with folks all across the country every single week. There are so many people who have no idea what's going on. Our media infrastructure is so fragmented that you can live your life and have no idea what's going on in the world. But they know what you're doing. They know when you post. And so if you choose to use your platform for whatever it is that you choose, I just implore you to at least consider including some of these really critical issues in what you're talking about, because you're going to be able to reach people that MSNBC and Fox News and Mother Jones and others would never be able to reach.
Justin, where does one find the courage to do that, right? Because I've seen some of the past videos you've done where you've worked in politics, yeah, on a particular side, and you have now chosen to really call a spade. But that took courage and boldness. So for the person that is thinking about doing what Garrison is saying, right, how do they get to that level?
I mean, the first thing that I try to do is, living here in Atlanta, having the civil rights generation as my grandparents and the people that are around us, it don't take too much more than a conversation with them to see what courage is all about, right? To read about what Fannie Lou Hamer went through just to get people to vote, just to demystify the voting process. She almost got beat to death for that. So I think me saying something that the Republican Party gets mad at, the Democratic Party gets mad at, isn't much compared to the sacrifices that have already been made. Now, this is what I think people have to understand. We're in a very serious situation right now. There was a study called the Hidden Tribe Study. And what the Hidden Tribe Study found is that our public discourse is really controlled by two very small groups. You have devoted conservatives on one side who are 6% of the population. You have progressive activists on the other side who are 8% of the population. These two groups don't agree on anything. That's the culture wars between those two. But they have two very important things in common. And that's that they're primarily white and they're primarily affluent. And they control the reward and punishment mechanism in our politics and culture. So what we talk about, they curate what we talk about. Who gets put on, who gets the bag, they're the one holding the bag, and that's how we get put on. So that's why you see some of our more conservative brothers and sisters, and not all of them, go into the public square and say something like, racism doesn't exist. Well, why would they say that? Because either they're trying to get the VP spot or they're trying to do something else to get to the bag because they know who's holding it and what they need to say to get there. But it's not just that side. There's also some of our more progressive brothers and sisters that hold back on what they want to say or what they need to say because they don't want to run into cancel culture. So we'll go out there when our kids are struggling with identity and all these issues, and we need to have compassion for that, but we'll go out there and deny the distinction, the biological and physiological distinction between male and female in a serious question because we don't want to bite the hand that feeds us even when God's design is clear. So I want us to be careful just to say, I'm going to talk about Trump all day and continue to talk about it. That's not necessarily the only problem. There's two sides of this, and we got to make sure that we're going to have a faithful witness, that we have the boldness to say, yeah, I got a problem with them, but that don't mean I'm letting you off the hook. Because if you think about what Jesus did, Jesus talked about the Pharisees. He talked about their legalism, but he didn't say, well, you know what? Now I'm going to be a Sadducee in their unbelief. No, he had an issue with both of them, and he showed a different way to go about it. So even as we talk about the white supremacy and Christian nationalism, let's do that, and let's do that with boldness. But don't forget there's an issue with moral order as well that we need to deal with. And some of our influencers are afraid to say something on that because that's not going to be smiled upon on the Breakfast Club. That's not going to be smiled upon in other pop culture spaces. And we got to make sure that we're holding each other accountable to say what's not even popular on that side as well.
Can I just say one thing, 30 seconds? I think something that you just said, brother, that really struck me is that I think a lot of black influencers have to get to the point where we are more interested in being free than we are being rich.
That's right.
Ooh, say it again, say it again.
Black people in general got to get to the place where we're more interested in being free than rich. And a lot of us are willing to sell out to be rich than to organize to be free. That's all I'll say.
No, that's good. Me and my wife talk about it all the time. I was like, if I could just come up off these morals, I'll be down to the Fox News real quick. But I can't do it. I can't do it. All right. So, Dr. Terrence, this question is for you. What strategies do you think we need to employ to engage and mobilize our audiences in this conversation around racial justice and equity?
Yeah, I think, too, there are a lot of willing people. There are just not a lot of available people. The question that I get in the context of the work that I do often is, how do I start? I ask people, like, what do you have on your plate? Sometimes we're so distracted and we have so much on our plate, we can't even make ourselves available to even be aware of the issues that are going on right in our communities. And, like, sometimes the things that are good on your plate doesn't even need to be on your plate because you have to make service a lifestyle. And service has a built-in component of proximity. That's why I always go with proximity and presence. Who are you around on the daily basis, a weekly basis? Are you close to the issues? When I look at Jesus, I see Jesus close to the lame person. I see Jesus close to the person who could not see. I see Jesus close to the person who society in that social context would deem as being someone who will be an outcast. And in order for our hearts to be set ablaze on the things that burdens the heart of God in this present moment, in this climate, we have to practice proximity. So my question to you, have you been proximate, and are you even available to be close to the issues? Do you even know what issues are going on in the context of your community? Do you know the people who are suffering? Have you heard their stories? Do you know their dreams? Do you know their fears? Do you know their hopes? Do you know what oppresses them? Do you know what can lift them up? And if the question is no, then you haven't been proximate enough. We got to be proximate. We have to manage our influence with proximity. I didn't get into this work to be an influencer. I got into this work to be proximate because I know what it's like to be overlooked and invisible. I was unhoused. I know what it's like to go to school in a social context and have my educators mislabel me because they didn't understand the social location that I was emerging from. So when God changed my life, I said, God, set me on fire so I can be proximate to the very thing that you gave me a testimony in to overcome. That's where my passion comes from. And if influence comes from that, so be it. But I want to use the platform that I've been given and steward that in a way that shows people that we have to show up with service. We have to show up with love. We have to show up with grace. And that comes by the vehicle of proximity. Have you been proximate?
And in that, I would assume not even assume because I've experienced it. I know there are attacks, right? When that happens, when you get proximate, right? When you get close. Kimini, talk to us about how you handle the pushback, right? Let's not deny you are a black woman who's educated, who know what she's talking about. So I'm pretty sure we all experience it. But I'm also willing to believe, based on conversations I've had with just women, and particularly black women, that the daggers that are thrown at you are probably 10 times harder than the ones that are thrown at us. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think I wrote quite a bit about this in the book I co-authored, which is a Truth Table: Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation. In that chapter, in the chapter, A Single Black Woman's Manifesto, I talk about the spectrum of hyper-invisibility and, hyper-visibility and hyper-invisibility, which is a continuum that black women deal with within the church and outside of the church. And because I am in a space that typically, is male-dominated, I do absolutely deal with a lot of pushback, but I have always been very clear on God's calling on my life, on the things that God has wanted me to pursue politically on behalf of our people, from starting out in anti-racism work and then evolving my work into reparations work, not only locally but globally. I just know that is the heart of God, because that's so deeply central to the gospel. And so for me, I've never been one that's been subject to the opinions of others with regard to the call on my life. I don't know if I think it's just some sort of supernatural wiring that God's given me. And so I often say that, and Jackie gets on me for this, but I'm like, I'm not an influencer, y'all. I was like, I am influential. And that is different. I don't run my account like an influencer. My numbers have been at the same numbers they've been for I don't know how many years. Because I don't care about these algorithms of oppression. Because that's really what they are. These platforms are run by racist white men. I mean, the minute that they decide to ruin it, hello Twitter, now X, it's a wrap for you on Instagram, on TikTok, whatever. You have got to be knowing that you have to be living into your purpose, and whatever medium and mode God wants that to flow through, then you have got to have the agility and the ability to be able to pivot and to move into that. And so I think that's just an aside that you have to be ready, and always, we got to stay ready, so you ain't got to get ready, because you really don't know when things will change and when things will shift. I think one of the big things that I always deal with is that I know many, some capable men and some that are straight mediocre. They get all types of opportunities. They get all types of salaried positions. They get all types of high-paid keynotes that I don't get simply because I'm a woman. It is a shame. It is a shame. It ain't right. But Jesus is my portion. He gonna take care of me. But you know what I mean? Like, Garrison, you talk about being free or being rich. That ain't no choice for me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what I do, ain't nobody gonna put you on the payroll talking about reparations and talking about Pan-Africanism and talking about our agency as black folks. Like, you're not gonna be on the payroll for that. So that ain't even a temptation for me. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's not even on the table. Like, it's not even on the table. I gotta hustle to do what I have been called to do. And that comes at a great cost to me. I'm not even close to my earning potential, not even close to it. But I just trust and lean on the everlasting arms of the Lord. And I'm not even playing with y'all. That's real rap. Like that is real rap. My intercessory prayer group knows that right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so it's not a game. I take some very serious hits, you know, and I don't think we always understand the ways in which we live our politics. I don't think we always understand the implications. Think about Nixon and the war on drugs and how that decimated our community. Then think about Reagan, right? And how that mass incarceration began to really ratchet up under that administration. And then Clinton came in, right? And then millions of our black men caught up in the system. And then now, how many single black women in the church are over here believing God for a husband? How many? That was too many. It's a civil rights issue. It's a civil rights issue. That is a politic. We're living out the consequences of political decisions. That's a real thing. That's not no game. That's not a game. We've lost a generation. Then you guys wonder where the men are. They're in prison. They're in prison. Particularly for drugs that are now legalized that white men are making bank on. These are the dots. We have to connect them.
And we ain't advocating for y'all to go roll it up. We just saying.
And can I just add, first thing, isn't it a shame that Ekemini isn't at her earning potential? Wouldn't it be amazing if we had the infrastructure amongst ourselves to provide that kind of salary for the people who are pouring so much into our community? I'm thankful for platforms like Patreon or Substack, where you can actually contribute to these intellectual figures who aren't supported by the market. That's one. Second thing, isn't it a shame that over 100 black pastors signed a letter and published it in the New York Times to support the crime bill that led to the mass incarceration of black people?
That's right.
That ain't right.
1994 crime bill.
That's right.
Hundreds of black pastors signed this letter saying we support this crime bill, published it in the New York Times, and we're living out the consequences of that today. And it's because of the lack of rigor often present in our conversations about justice and politics in the church.
That's right.
Ain't it though? Say it louder one more time. So good. Soak it in, people. Soak it in. Dr. Terrence, I want you to pick up on that tension that Ekemini was discussing, in that she doesn't really have an option. She has to go get it, right? A little bit about your background. You came up and thought maybe you did have an option, trying to change the culture in which where you were at your particular church. Can you talk to us about that transition and how you went from one space to this new freer space?
Dr. Terrence or Dr. Tisby? Which one?
Tisby.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, so we talked about courage before, and I was in these white Christian spaces trying to be black-centered, and that didn't work. And it took me back to Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are you when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake, right? So not just for being a jerk or being outspoken, but for being outspoken for the truth. And that has really sustained me. When we talk about how you have courage, you are in good company when you are the target of attacks because you stand up for the truth. I'm very concerned about an influencer culture, even among black folks, that wants to prioritize growth over truth. Because there are many, many things that are unpopular. Justin, you referenced when Jesus was getting to the apex of his popularity, he said, now you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood.
John 6.
And people were like, we rocked with you up until that point. Now we're gone.
That's right.
What is that point for us? And I just posted on my Instagram. I see folks, black folks, being platformed in very wealthy, holding the bag, white institutions, be they religious or not. And sometimes we have to make strategic choices that say, I will not align with that because of my principles, because I am trying to be anti-racist and pro-black and all of these things and pro-justice, and I will maybe miss the bag. And Ekemini has been a shining example of integrity in that, and having to wrestle in prayer for survival economically because of these principled positions. But this is where also, I'm a historian, so I have to get on that soapbox for a second. We do have to study our history. I think black folks in general, we think because we're black and we have personal experiences of racism, that is enough. That qualifies us to say, I know about race. You know your personal experience of race, but you don't know the long black freedom struggle. And I think it is incredibly important that we do study this history. We've mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer a few times. I lived in the Delta where Fannie Lou Hamer was born and stayed, talking about being proximate. She could have parlayed her national prominence into getting up out of there. I lived in Phillips County, Arkansas, which is right on the Mississippi River. USA Today article in 2019 named it as the 4th poorest county in the country. This is the environment Fannie Lou Hamer grew up in and stayed in times when speaking up for voting rights got her beat and tortured in prison, in a jail, in a rural Mississippi. But so many, I hadn't even heard of Fannie Lou Hamer before I went to the Delta. So many of our heroes, historical heroes, whose legacy could inspire us today, we don't even know. We're ignorant of our power as a people if we don't study our history, because if you want to get inspiration about people who made sacrifices for the sake of justice, there's an entire cloud of witnesses that can inspire us today. But you can't just rely on, oh, I got pulled over and it was a horrific experience, I know about race. Yeah, you did. But did you know that you can look at the badges in the 19th century that look like sheriff's badges, but they don't say sheriff, they say slave patrol. And if that's a root, then what is the fruit? It's you getting pulled over. But everything has a history, but if we don't know our history, honestly, we are disempowered. Our history is our power. The fact that we're here today is a result of the history that we've lived through and survived. So why are we cutting ourselves off from that root and that experience and that legacy?
That's good. Clap up for that. So this is a question for everyone on the panel, because you all do such incredible work, and I would imagine, and I know it's tiring, right? And so for the people in the audience who are doing, again, we're talking about influence, right? And in their spheres of influence, and it may be tiring for them too, but in this particular context, and because I'm a therapist, I have to ask, how are you all prioritizing your mental health and rest and restoring yourself to continue to do the work? And anyone can go.
I think vicarious trauma is real. That is something that you have to consider when you are proximate to people who are suffering. Not only do you absorb the suffering of others, you're also dealing with your own personal trauma. To be alive is to experience trauma and grief. And so you have to have a regimen of lamentation, crying out. You have to have a regimen of healthy practices. I believe in therapy.
Hey, say it again, please.
Yes.
I believe in creating the type of space where you can deal and cope with the traumas that you carry as an influencer, not on a one-off basis, but I've built in personally a regimen that I do every day, every single day. If you're devotion, working out in the gym every single week, I talk to a therapist. I have a cloud of witnesses around me that aren't people that I'm just looking up to, like colleagues, where you can have safe space to dialogue about critical issues that you carry. Because whatever you carry, if you don't let it out, it will consume you. And we have to have safe spaces to let out what we are carrying, because sometimes if we don't, then our clarity and our judgment will be misguided.
I know you in therapy. Your therapist gave you
I
that
have,
line, huh?
I have a clinical background as well.
So you, come on now.
That's right, you do.
Anybody, please.
I think this is a great question. I'm so glad that you asked it. Very important. Because I think it goes beyond just, self-care. I think it's really a stewardship issue. And so a couple of things that I do. For me, working out is essential. I got to get them endorphins. And so I work out Monday through Friday, very early in the morning. But that's the thing I do. I get up very early in the morning and I work out. Then after that, I have a prayer line that I'm a part of. I help to lead. I pray on Tuesday morning. I lead intercessory prayer. So I do that. Being a part of my local church, so I teach. I have to go home today because I got to teach the teens tomorrow for Mother's Day. So so I got to go teach at church, upholding my spiritual disciplines. So prayer, reading the Word, journaling. That's really huge for me. Spending time with family and friends. Just making sure I'm watching my TV, just really trying to decompress and remove myself from that. I'm also very cognizant about what I take in on social media, what accounts I follow, how much content I'm going to take in, because I am absolutely consumed and concerned with the things that are happening, not only in Gaza, but Sudan and Haiti and Congo. Which we don't talk about those lives. We don't talk about the African lives. We'll talk about Afrophobia on another day. But being able to go, okay, I got it, and I pray about it too. Because it's one thing to opine and put it online, and then it's another thing to also pray. Because if you're not praying about it, do you really care? Or are we performing? You see, so that's something that we got to be aware of too. And so making sure that I have enough information so I can go to the throne with it, to God with it. In addition, right, to the activations and the advocacy and the protests and all the things that I do in addition to that. So I try to balance it out. So
That's good.
I'm big on self-care because there's been so much trauma that I know we have endured, particularly in the church, right? I went through this exercise just the other day, and I thought back to my previous 3 churches, and all of them are sites of trauma. And I said, God, what is going on? Where do you want me to go? Where do you want me to land if this has been my experience? And so I'll say 2 things. One, on a very practical level. To your question earlier, how do I sort of navigate, these spaces where being Black-centered and being pro-justice can sometimes be, put you up as a target for attack? I diversify my income streams. So I learned firsthand that if you're relying on a paycheck from the people who are promoting the status quo, you're always going to be beholden to them and bounded by them. So part of freedom is the ability not to depend entirely upon a paycheck from those sources. So that's my Substack, my book writing, Justice Takes Sides brand apparel line. We've got a table in the lobby. All of those things help. So then I feel freer, and because when you bottle that up, ooh. The other thing I'll say is this, lastly, is self-care. This is the Black Christian Influencer Conference. What does it fundamentally mean to be a Christian? It means to be a Christ follower. And so when I think of all the work that we have to do, my heart is heavy for y'all, because you get up every single day and you're public about this and you live it personally. My plea for all of us is to look to Jesus. The center of our faith is not a principle, it's not a philosophy, it's a person. And at the end of the day, as we're trying to discern all these issues, Lord, how will I make money? How will I grow my platform? How will I be faithful to the call? At the end of the day, we got to reckon with this man enfleshed in a Palestinian, Jewish, Middle Eastern body.
Hey.
Who came to seek us and to save us, and it's where you stand in relation to Jesus that matters above all of this and before all of this and in all of this. And if we can come back to those basic principles, I think God is not the author of confusion. We'll get a lot more clarity on what we're trying to do and be.
Yes, good. Let me, if I can build on that point, and also the prayer point too. We're talking a lot about freedom and liberation, which is very important because everybody on the stage is very serious about that and is sacrificing for that. I want us to keep in mind that to be free without a moral compass, to be free without direction, is to be lost. And so as we talk, and this is, I want to be a little bit of counterweight, as we talk about the importance of social justice, which we can see from Amos to Jeremiah to Jesus, is very important. Do not forget about holiness. Because if you're out there fighting for justice and you're not living holy, or you're not valuing holiness, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And one of the things that is, I was just talking to my good friend Esau McCauley about this. One of the things that troubles me sometimes is that when Christians get involved in social justice in earnest, the theology starts getting real unfamiliar. Starts getting real fuzzy and ambiguous.
That's right.
And that doesn't have to be the case.
That's right.
That should be the
Because
next panel.
Fannie Lou Hamer believed in the authority of Scripture and was one of the baddest freedom fighters that the world has ever seen. Fred Shuttlesworth believed in the authority of Scripture, and it did not stop him from being an outstanding freedom fighter. But too many times, I think we don't go into those spaces with